Hello guys, Crispy here, welcome back to another video. In this one, my friends, I'm going to be testing a GeForce RTX 4060 in Alan Wake 2. This one is the MSI Ventus version of the card. We are running it with the latest NVIDIA drivers, which aren't available yet, or at least they shouldn't be, but they will be soon because these are optimized for the game, and I'm not manually overclocking it. You can see all of its specs right here in TechPowerUp's GPU series, as Bulbari is also enabled. We got 8 gigs of GDDR6 to work with, and finally, over on the left, we're pairing it with the i5-13600K at stock speeds and 32 gigabytes of RAM DDR5 6000 MHz in dual channel. Let's take a quick look at the requirements now. As you can see, it actually asks for a minimum of an RTX 2060 6 gigabytes of VRAM for quality DLSS at 1080p low settings. So that's pretty high, of course, like for 30 FPS as well. Now, of course, the 2060 and the RX 6600 are a lot slower than the 4060. It actually says that the 3060 is recommended for medium settings at 1440p and 30 FPS with balanced DLSS, by the way. But well, by looking at the requirements, I guess the 4060 stands at recommended, maybe? So I'm expected around like 45 FPS maybe with 1440p medium settings and balanced DLSS. But let's find out, shall we? Alright, let's start by going through the settings. As usual, I'm playing at 1080p first. We're also going to test 1440p and 4K. DLSS or FSR need to be enabled, by the way. I will use DLSS with DLAA because that's the native resolution with DLAA applied, which makes the image supposedly look a little bit better than native. But if you don't have an RTX GPU, well, you'll need to use FSR2 on native. So I guess it's still going to use some sharpening on top of native resolution. Now, I actually tried these two side by side, and I found that the LAA provides more FPS with a 4060 at least than FSR2 on native, so I'll stick to that, of course, and then we're going to play around with the different presets of the DLSS. Frame generation is turned off, and we're starting with the low settings preset, no motion blur or film grain right here, and the low settings preset doesn't really max out everything. As you can see, the global illumination is on medium over here. We got this enabled, which makes a huge difference to visual quality, as well as global global reflections and screen space reflections as well. I wouldn't really touch those. Okay, this one is on high as well. Let's move on. All right, guys, we're starting here inside of the sheriff's station. Ooh, there's a PC. We gotta check that out, of course. What is that? I can't really read the things because it's on low set. Also, those are possessed over there. Yes, definitely. Anyway, well, the game is quite blurry, as you can probably tell. This probably a little bit emphasized by the capture card, honestly, and at higher resolutions it will look much better, of course. And it also looks very good in terms of like the lighting and the shadows, pretty much everything LOD and stuff, although that's on high still. Even on the low settings preset, and as you can see, it's getting well above 60 FPS for now. VRAM usage is also under control, although 6 gigabytes of usage is a bit too high for low settings. I wonder how the 4 gigabyte GPUs will handle this game. They're probably gonna stutter a bit too much, but they recommend a 6 gigabyte GPU as a minimum after all, right? Anyway, yeah, dropping into the 60s right here with just a little bit of vegetation, and you also start in the woods, by the way, which is slightly more intensive than this area right here. Sometimes it actually gets very close FPS, or pretty much the same, like over here, for example. It gets exactly the same FPS as in the woods because we're seeing a lot of vegetation around us, and it drops into the low 60s, guys, at 1080p low settings preset, native resolution, with a 2023 card. Like, what is it? I mean, the game looks insanely good, okay, even on low, but I wish they dialed down the graphical quality a bit more and made it playable on more GPUs, because you need a 4060 at the moment to achieve 60 plus FPS all of the time. What the hell is happening? Okay, I can go in this direction. To achieve 60 plus FPS all of the time, and even then, it's probably gonna drop. So, it's quite concerning, isn't it, my friends? Thing is, we can always enable DLSS, and since the game is quite soft even at native resolution, it looks kind of the same with quality DLSS, which upscales the game from 720p to 1080p. Yeah, I can't really tell much of a difference. If there was a sharpness slider, it would have been so much better, by the way. And now we're getting very high FPS, right? This is another one of those games, like Remnant 2, that we've had earlier this year, that benefits tremendously from DLSS and FSR2 as well, from upscaling in general. And you can see it right here. Instead of dropping into the low 60s in this part of the map, it's actually getting 90s and 80s, dropping into like the mid 80s, I guess. Yeah, look at that, 84 I think it was the minimum so far. So it's going to be much more stable while looking pretty much the same at the same time with quality DLSS. So this setting is mandatory to be enabled, because otherwise you can't really play at more than low settings with 60 plus all of the time. And this isn't really a game where you need 60 plus all of the time, really. It's a single player title. I'm gonna try to go back to the woods now to show you the FPS there, by the way, but it should be very similar to what we saw inside of that little park area. We can't really do much in this area anyways. And this is a linear title as well, so other areas further into the game will probably be a little bit more intensive or a little bit less intensive. This is way too dark, I don't like it. But as you can see, it's actually dropping a little bit more right now compared to what we saw previously into the 70s. So at native resolution, or with DLAA enabled instead of DLSS quality, it will definitely drop from 60. Alright, this is it. Much brighter, although not a lot really. Right? Also, maybe I should probably change the gamma a little bit for you guys to see better, you know? Yeah, 2.2 will probably be a little bit better. Similar to what we saw previously, dropping a couple more frames, but it's still definitely enough for a game like this. Again, I would probably be happy even with like 40 frames per second. 30 is a bit too low. I don't really like the choppiness of 30 FPS, but it should still be playable on 30 FPS as well. And if all you want to do is look at the visuals, which look extremely detailed in this game, especially at higher settings, well, it's probably worth trading some of that performance for the visuals in this particular title. Anyway, what if you want the best FPS possible? Let's do quality DLSS with frame generation. You know, that should be fun. And, alright, now we can get 100 plus frames per second. And the input lag is not really that noticeable either, because I believe there's a bit of mouse acceleration in this game already. Like, at least I could feel it previously. Okay, anyway, this is the competitive experience in this game that isn't competitive whatsoever. So you should probably not use these settings, but if you want to get the highest FPS possible, this is probably it, without making the game look very crappy without those settings that are still on medium and high as well on the low settings preset. So yeah, you can actually get a really smooth experience if you're wondering, with decent graphics, but I would definitely not go with this. I'm gonna start by setting it to medium settings here. This is it. No ray tracing yet, okay? And disable frame generation as well as disable this. Let's take a look at medium settings at native 1080p. And well, you can see that it gets lower than 60 frames per second most of the time, probably even dipping into the 40s in a little bit more intensive scenarios. Also, the game doesn't really stutter all that much. Sometimes it has the odd frame time spike here and there, but for the most part, it's actually going to be a really smooth experience, so that's great. You know, native resolution looks extremely similar to quality DLSS, so I would definitely just choose the quality DLSS setting over here to achieve higher FPS, but even here, it's not enough for us to achieve 60 plus the entire time. Actually, they said in the system requirements, if you saw it at the beginning of the video, that the 3070 was required at 1080p with 60 FPS on medium, with quality DLSS, if I was not mistaken. Maybe it was at 440p balanced DLSS. Anyway, you needed a 3070 for these settings at 60 plus FPS all of the time, I guess, and it's true, the 3070 is quite a bit faster than the little RTX 4060 right here, but hey, if all you want is to get 60-ish FPS on average most of the time, you know, 60 to 70, and you don't mind a few drops into the 50s, which I wouldn't really mind that. I actually played the entire first part of this game with around like 30 to 50 frames per second most of the time, because I was playing at 4K high with DLSS performance on the 4060, and that's what I got, and it does look way better in this, by the way. Anyway, it will drop into the 50 sometimes. I doubt it's going to drop much further than that, but it's possible that it will happen. But it does look quite a bit better than low settings did on medium. So let's go back to DLAA, native resolution, and high settings this time around, which doesn't really max out everything. As you can see, this one is still not on high, as well as there's no ray tracing or path tracing or transparency going on. We're going to enable those in just a little bit. Okay, it's the next step up in quality, but things do look quite a bit better right now, don't they? And it's still good enough for a playable experience. I'm trying to block the dead body here. It's out of the view. YouTube, please don't demonetize. Thank you. All right, let's go in this direction again. By the way, you already know that in a city you won't really achieve these low FPS. Probably going to be like 50 most of the time, high 40s as well. Here it can drop into the 30s. But again, if you are after that 30 FPS experience, it is going to be smooth and playable. You can use to activate Saga's flashlight. You can use what to activate Saga's flashlight? I don't have a... Oh, it's E. Okay. Does it have batteries? I don't think so. All right, at least we got rid of that notification there. Okay, but let's enable DLSS on quality next. This is 1080p high with DLSS quality, and now you can achieve 60 plus FPS, even up to 80 at times on average. Not all of the time. Of course, it already dropped slightly on medium settings from 60 in some scenarios, so it will also happen on high. Again, for a story-driven title like this one, it's completely fine with 60-ish on average. I mean, I played the entire Alan Wake 1, as well as a bit of the DLC, with probably 30 or 40 frames per second. I don't remember because I wasn't really counting the FPS, but I had the GT 630M laptop at the time, and, well, I think I played at like 720p, don't remember the settings, and I played the entire thing through. That's equivalent to a GT 710. So the experience wasn't great, but I still had fun because it's a story-driven title and pretty slow-paced as well. So yeah, you can certainly enjoy this experience. There we go. It's now dropping, finally. Found an area with a bit more dense vegetation, I guess. And it's dropping into like the mid-50s sometimes. After taking a look at those requirements and watching lots of videos on the subject of like the requirements of this game, of course, I was expecting much worse coming from a 4060. Anyway, let's enable that frame generation, make it even smoother. Frame generation now, I can tell it made things look a little bit softer this time around. It wasn't as soft previously. But you do get 60 plus 100% of the time. Still without ray tracing and everything. But hey, it's good, right? And VRAM is nearly maxed out, although it's not really maxing out, so it's not really stuttering and affecting performance like crazy. What did I hear, guys? 100 FPS average. Frame generation... It kind of changes the experience a little bit, and since this isn't a competitive shooter, the added input lag from FG doesn't really affect the gameplay whatsoever. Anyway, let's disable frame generation this time, play at 1080p native again, and still on the high settings. But now, let's enable ray tracing, guys. So on low settings, you can see that it enables ray reconstruction, which is definitely very welcomed, and you should have it enabled with any RTX GPU because it works with any of them. Direct lighting is also enabled, but the path traced indirect lighting is turned off, okay? Path tracing is extremely intensive, as I'm sure you're aware of by now. Transparency also switched from off to low, and you could see there in that little rock that it actually makes quite the difference just by having ray tracing enabled and disabled. Look at that. Just look at that. What? Seriously? That's crazy, dude. It looks way better like this. But, of course, it is way more intensive. And this is only ray tracing low preset at 1080p with high settings, everything else. But, you know, if you're using ray tracing, you care about visuals, so you don't really want to drop it to medium or low for the sake of using ray tracing, I guess, right? But anyway, yeah, it's it's a terrible experience like this, right? You should definitely utilize DLSS with ray tracing enabled. Otherwise, the 4060 just can't do it. Okay. Now with DLSS on quality, with ray tracing enabled, it's good to achieve 30 FPS. So we got like 10 more FPS, I guess. But it's still gonna drop if I stand there, looking in this direction. I think it's still dropping into the 20s. Not great, guys, not great. And sometimes when you turn the camera around like this really fast, yeah, it has a little stop at times, you know. That is not good. You either want to lock it to 30 FPS, overclock the card a bit, or enable that frame generation with ray tracing, because that will change the experience, of course. It's now closer to 60 FPS, although it's still not great. Because now, when you are close to 60 FPS and especially below 60 FPS, that frame generation input lag comes into play and it starts being very noticeable and... I mean, it's just not really that enjoyable this time around. It says 50-ish FPS, and that would be great at native without frame generation. But again, with all of that input delay, because the base frame rate was so low, it's probably not a great idea to do this. But alright, what about like high ray tracing? That enables path traced indirect lighting, guys. And yeah, that's gonna be way more intensive. Still with frame generation, okay, and DLSS quality. Ooh, now this is bad, okay. Damn, yeah, I can't play like this, guys. Oh my god, yeah, the input delay here is insane, and I really don't find this playable, even though it says 40 FPS right there. You're getting the same input lag as about like 25 frames per second, so not ideal. Also, if you're interested, medium ray tracing preset also enables PTIL, I guess I'll call it that from now on medium, okay? It's only a very slight difference in terms of medium and high ray tracing presets here, but let's just disable that, okay? And disable this as well, and go back to the native resolution and test it out at 1440p next. Okay, we're now at 1440p native res with the LAA and playing with a low settings preset here. All right, this is it, no ray tracing, and still looks really good, guys. I mean, there is just no need to play with ray tracing in my opinion, and it's rough actually. With 30-ish FPS around here, that's pretty low, guys. Okay, I'm actually going to play it through a little bit here at 1440p low settings. Maybe it's going to become a little bit brighter, the image, because it's pretty dark so far. We're also getting a few more frame time spikes right now at 1440p low settings. VRAM usage seems to be under control though, but the RAM usage went up a little bit as well. So maybe it swapped some things that should have been on the VRAM, but since we only got 8 gigabytes, it went to the RAM already. We're back here, getting 30s. I guess it's gonna be 30 plus all of the time at 1440p low settings. But you already know, you should probably use some DLSS. Now, should developers optimize their games with DLSS in mind? I don't think so, but hey, it does improve our FPS like crazy, as you can see, from 30s, lower 30s into high 50s. That's a substantial increase in frames for pretty much the same exact visuals. I would actually happily play this game with these FPS all of the time, and the visuals on low settings just look very good still, so no worries here in my opinion, you know. Again, I just wish that low settings actually looked like low settings, because this to me looks, like medium settings, maybe high settings as well. There should have been like a very low settings, in my opinion, to make a lot of lower end cards playable in Alan Wake 2, because there's still a ton of stuff here on low settings, right? Now, with frame generation at the same time, we can get... we don't see as big of an improvement as we saw at 1080p, for sure. And some of that information that should have been on VRAM already swapped into the RAM, guys, because RAM usage went up once again. It was at 11-ish gigabytes, now it's at 12. So that means that we already maxed out the VRAM at some point, at least. But still, no major stuttering, at least. 70 something FPS average is what we get here. We still see a little bit of choppiness sometimes when moving the camera around, but nothing major really. Again, I could play even at native resolution, honestly, with 30 plus FPS all of the time. Okay, let's use 1440p DLAA, so native resolution, medium settings. This is the medium settings preset, and guys, although it looks quite a bit better, it's super choppy. As you can see, we're heavily running out of VRAM at this point. You can see it by the increase in RAM utilization. VRAM, it's not really hitting 8 gigabytes, but again, it already swapped a lot of things, and it's slowing things down like crazy. It just can't really keep up with all of the things that we gotta load into the VRAM. So we gotta use some DLSS right away, okay, just to save the little 4060. Imagine if they had like 10 gigabytes of VRAM on this card. It would have been so much better, guys. Anyway, getting 30s here, moving the camera around, still can feel the choppiness. You can see the frame time graph as well, just going crazy for a bit there, just by doing this. Yeah, not ideal, but playing with the controller, I guess it wouldn't really be noticeable. And it's getting 30s to 40s most of the time. But again, it's a little bit more inconsistent, and the VRAM is just not enough here. So I'm gonna go ahead and drop this down to balanced, because I think this is how the 3060 was positioned in the system requirements, right? Balanced DLSS, medium settings, 1440p, at 30 FPS. Moving the camera around like this, frame time still a little bit crazy. Look at that over there on the frame time graph. That was pretty horrible. Ah, man. Okay, so clearly at 1440p, you should probably stick to low with quality DLSS. That was actually a decent experience, but with anything above low settings, it's really, really rough. High settings over here now, just for the curious out there, with DLAA first. Completely awful experience, of course, as expected. 20s. It's pretty interesting that it gets very close FPS using high settings as it does with medium settings. At 1080p, we saw the same thing. I'm gonna use balanced DLSS now. Also, I forgot to use frame generation on medium, so I'm gonna get back to it in just a little bit, guys, okay? But as you can see, we still have the VRAM limitation issue, the slowdowns happening sometimes, and yeah, those little frame time spikes every now and again. But it isn't a terrible experience. I'm gonna say that I could still play like this, especially with an FPS lock. It would be decent. The RAM usage is going down slowly as well, because the internal resolution is so low now with balanced DLSS, of course. So, I mean, this is an option. It still looks very good indeed. Okay, let's enable that frame generation, which increases the VRAM utilization once again. So VRAM usage is going up a little bit. It's very choppy still. Like, you can see a lot more issues with the frame time consistency now. Although, now it's a little bit smoother. But since the FPS are so low, it's just not worth utilizing because of the added input lag, guys. Just use FG at 1080p, I think. Or maybe at 1440 low settings. Not really at medium or high settings. Still gonna test like medium over here. There we go. This is it. We can achieve 60s. But again, the input lag is around the same as 30s, so I don't think it's ideal. And especially when it drops from 60, the frame time goes a little bit crazy, and it just kills the immersiveness, I would say. You can really start noticing something wrong with input lag whenever it dips into the 50s, guys. So, alright. That's it for 1440p. Let's play at 4K. Here we have it. 3840 by 2160 DLAA, low settings preset, guys, and it still looks very good indeed. Oh boy, it's running out of VRAM like crazy. Look at that. Look at that. Whoa! What? No! No, 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 no. This is not a swamp. This is just, it's not loading the textures right, guys. It is not loading the textures right. It's completely out of VRAM at this point. Jesus. Why didn't this happen? Oh, of course, I was playing with the DLSS performance setting previously. And that fixes everything, because now it's at a lower resolution. Okay. So yeah, apparently at native res, even on the low settings with low textures, and by the way, yes, you don't need to restart this game to apply the settings, okay? It does everything automatically like in Cyberpunk 2077 and on the fly. I like that about the game. But yeah, I did not expect what we saw at native res, guys. Does it happen again if I try it? Yes, look at that. Look at that RAM utilization going crazy high for a moment. Damn, it just kills everything, and we're back to this crap again, guys. Whoo, boy. Now, as I showed you, the performance DLSS setting is very good looking, guys. I mean, it's so much better like this than it was at native 1080p. And the FPS aren't really all that different. We're still getting like 50s, sometimes 40s, of course, especially looking in this direction. I guess this is the most intensive area that I've come across so far, right here. But yeah, it doesn't really drop from 40 frames per second. I guess it's safe to say that it's going to be like 30 plus 100% of the time and like 40 plus for the most part. But hey, what if you want more out of your game, more graphical fidelity? Well, this is gonna work quite decently on high settings, okay? And DLSS performance, because I already tested it this way, and it was a reasonable experience, but I guess that was back in the city area, because here it actually dips down into the 20s. Sometimes, in very intensive scenarios, you can see that it can still hold 30-ish at times. I guess maybe I've played this first part at 4K performance DLSS in low settings, or maybe medium settings instead of high settings, because I really expected higher performance here, guys. Alright, not sure why, because it does look insanely good. But yeah, I think maybe on medium, it's a little bit more adequate to achieve 30 plus all of the time. So here we go. No, it's about the same thing. We only gained about 2 frames per second or so. Maybe 3. So still not enough. If you want to play at 4K with DLSS performance, it's the low settings or nothing, right? Yeah, it gets 36, 37 in worst case scenario, where medium settings got like 28 and high settings got like 26 or 25. Also, let me disable this one right here. This can change a lot. Yep, okay, so it gives us quite a few more FPS. Look at that. 43. Right. So that's the setting that increases our FPS the most when you set it to low. I'm gonna quickly do it on high, actually. So this is high with post-processing on low. And, oh, okay, so this must be how I was playing the game after all. So I wasn't mistaken, it was on high. And I was seeing 30 plus FPS all of the time. It was just with post-processing on low instead of high. Yeah, that makes a huge difference, like 10 FPS difference, right? Crazy stuff, guys. Anyways, now let's enable DLSS frame generation, and that will max out our VRAM, of course. There we go. Yeah, RAM usage went up a little bit. Ooh, the textures are starting to flicker. We're getting very low FPS as well. Oh, the textures on our jacket, I just noticed that they can't really load. And we're back to the same crap as before. So the feature, the frame generation feature, the 40 series main selling point, aside from like power consumption, I guess, and extreme performance with like 4090 and 4080, is not really working properly at high resolutions with budget GPUs. And this is what's gonna happen in the future when games start using more VRAM even at 1080p. Imagine enabling frame generation, needing that little bit of extra memory on the GPU and not having it, and having this instead. That's actually ridiculous. So that's been it, guys. Thank you very much for watching this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll be back very soon with a 4080 test in Alan Wake 2. Can't wait to play at max out settings with path tracing and everything. And as always, catch you in the next one, and I love you all. Bye-bye.